Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I had promised and I had stated this over the telephone to my friends at Philosophical Research Society that we would do at least 2 lectures, Friday lectures, concerning our late friend and teacher, and you might say sort of my boss, because I was his lecturer from 1970 until probably sometime even after his death at the Philosophical Research Society, Manly Palmer Hall. And the reason for that being that it is our hope, mine and the Philosophical Research Society, that on the date closest to the anniversary of his death, which I will mention very soon, at the very end of August, we intend to have another special memorial meeting for him at 3910 Los Feliz and Griffith Park Boulevard at the Philosophical Research Society, and we are looking forward to that one. I made the stipulation, however, that I absolutely require a live audience. You know, it's somewhat discouraging to speak either to dead people, especially in the terms of a hoped-for response, and secondly, also people who are far away, scattered in the regions, and who only seem to live on a screen. You know, what kind of a life is that? So in any event, those were my stipulations and still are, and I'm so glad that you are here and that you are alive. I'm sure that you yourselves are fairly happy about that circumstance, I would say. Now, these 2 talks, interconnected, were planned by me to be presented according to a kind of loose plan. Namely, the first one this evening would be largely biographical and personal reminiscences of Mr. Hall. And then the second one, we would look into what might be called his spiritual and esoteric heritage, which is very great and which is very seldom dealt with by people. So I think that these 2, when we're able to join these 2 subjects together, we will have a fairly complete picture. Also, sometime, I believe in June, we will there will be in the Quest magazine, which is sort of the national organ of the Theosophical Society, under whose auspices we hold forth here in this building, there will be published an essay of mine which contains my reminiscences of Manly Hall and reactions to them, which should be, I think, quite revealing, in addition to earlier things that I have written. And as soon as that is in my hand, I will duplicate that article and have it duplicated, and it will be available here for you to take home. So those are kind of the preliminary considerations. It's kind of a decision how to begin this kind of a subject, but it has been always permissible and in fact customary for old people to reminisce. Why is that? Because that was their life when they were not old. Right? And therefore the remembering of events and circumstances that occurred at that time are pleasant and come to mind rather easily. While if you try to remember, I don't know, how much money you spent at the grocery store today, that doesn't come easily. First of all, it's an unpleasant memory to have to pay out money. As Dr. Johnson, Samuel Johnson in history said that there is a world of difference between receiving money and having to pay it out. So you may wish to keep that in mind, especially in these difficult economic times. So let us say we'll just sort of mix the reminiscences with the perhaps more serious matter. And the first reminiscence that I will throw out, which is also the one in my recent article, has to do with the fact that for a fairly short time after I arrived in this country, so that would have been probably late 1952 or early 1953, I was quartered. That means being in a quarter, not drawn and quartered, in a part of California that really turned out to me to be my least favorite. I hope there's nobody here who will be offended, namely the San Joaquin Valley. I couldn't get out of there fast enough, but it took me still about 3/4 of a year to do so. Well, during that time, I made a journey up here with a theosophical friend of mine, now deceased, and in the course of our gallivanting around in Los Angeles, we went to the Philosophical Research Society on Los Feliz Boulevard, and Los Feliz and Griffith Park Boulevard, where we were aware of a very fine institution and a very outstanding and amazing gentleman as the head and the teacher, namely Manly Palmer Hall. Well, as it happened, when we entered, a very nice sort of pink-faced, roly-poly gentleman by the name of Gilbert Olson, who was really a very good friend and helper of Mr. Hall, came to greet us, and he was wringing his hands. Oh, I'm so sorry. This was the one day of this month when Mr. Hall isn't here. So we said, well, in any event, thank you for your wishes. Could I, however, I'm sure if he were here, he would want to show you various things. And so Mr. Olson went with his key and opened up all kinds of doors, among them even the sort of generally hidden vault of the society, and there he showed us all manner of treasures, beginning with, since we were of the Theosophical Society, first edition of H.P. Blavatsky's Secret Doctrine, with her own handwritten notes on the margins, the legendary triangular a manuscript attributed to the Comte Saint-Germain in cipher. So let's say the deciphering would have taken too long, but it certainly looked very impressive. Some of the alchemical manuscripts and treasures and such. So we were very, very happy and very honored by this reception, and we told him that we would certainly be back, and please, thanks to him, and please thank Mr. Hall when he comes back. And with that, we went off into the dreary recesses of the San Joaquin Valley. In any event, it took but a number of weeks, and some opportunity offered itself. I was already so feeling out my way to be able to move to Los Angeles, that we came back. And at that time we were here, I think, on a Tuesday and a Wednesday, and once again Mr. Olson told us, Wednesday evening Mr. Hall speaks in the upstairs lecture hall. So I said, well, good, we can come to that. So we went, and this was actually at a time when only the smaller lecture hall upstairs was operative, and the large auditorium having not been built yet, which was only built in the next few years. So we laboriously climbed up the stairs and established ourselves there, and then after a while, through a door that we didn't know at that time that led into the library, to a door, a tall and heavy-set gentleman with beautiful wavy hair came out and sat down on the little dais on a large chair, and he began lecturing. And we were there for about 2.5 hours. And they tell you in those 2.5 hours there was not one boring moment. So when and then all of a sudden, just about 2.5 hours, Mr. Hall looked at his watch and he said, "Time is up." And he got up, made a bow, waved at people a little bit, and exited the same route that he had come. And I must say, well, I am not very easily flabbergasted. I certainly was. I came out and I said to my friends once we were down in the courtyard, you know, this undoubtedly must be the greatest orator of the century. I have never heard anything like it. One sentence after the other, every sentence perfectly formed, every word perfectly enunciated, and all the sentences and paragraphs, if one can call them under those conditions, beautifully woven together, rolling on like a magnificent, sonorous ocean, on and on. As I say, I have heard many university professors, preachers, all kinds of people throughout my then still fairly young life, but never anything like this. And so I looked at my friend and I said, I don't know about you, but I want to come back to this place so I can see and hear this man more. And so in a few months' time I accomplished that. This, since I gave this account here and there, it gave rise to a rumor, which I don't know why I bring it up, namely that I have come to Los Angeles and maybe to America in order to see Manly Hall. Well, you know, in an esoteric sense that was true, because I found out that that meeting and many subsequent meetings with him really gave, shall we say, an unexpected and yet marvelous justification to my coming to America, but I certainly had no notion of it in advance. In fact, another reminiscence, how did I learn of Manly Hall? Well, while I was in the San Joaquin Valley, you know, there's still some pretty nice people there, mostly my fellow theosophists from the Fresno Lodge Theosophical Society, and among them there was a darling elderly lady. I think I should pay tribute to her name, Mrs. Helen Logeson, who owned a substantial farm in the valley, and a very nice lady, and along with the farm she also owned a sizable library. And so she led me into her house, which was on her farm somewhere outside of Fresno, and she said, "No, here are some books that you're going to have to read." And they were all books by Manly Palmer Hall. Among them the gigantic encyclopedical work, which often is marketed under the name of the Wisdom of All Ages, with all its beautiful pictures, both colored and black and white. And I said, well, anybody who can write and publish a book like this, it's must certainly be very interesting. And these initial contacts then led me there. Now, just a little bit of maybe some of you are not familiar, and to others these data will be a little bit redundant. I'll just give a few biographical data. First of all, Mr. Manly Hall left this earth on August 29, 1990, about 5 months short of having reached his 90th year. And by that time, he delivered between 7,500 and 7,600 lectures in the United States and abroad, authored over 150 books and booklets, and wrote countless magazine articles. In 1934, sometime after his coming to California, he founded the Philosophical Research Society located in Los Angeles, which then, under his skillful direction, acquired one of the finest libraries related to esoterical in the Western Hemisphere, and which served really as the main focus of his life and activities. In addition to the library, there were many beautiful and exciting things there if one got around to them. In addition also to the ones that Mr. Gilbert Olson showed us at that particular time. There were, for instance, robes and what are called the breastplates, that's a technical term, of the ancient Chinese empire's officials, many of them. Beautiful gold applique pieces of cloth, which when the emperor appointed a new mandarin, would be sent to the mandarin so that he could put it on his robe. There were times when Mr. Hall would come and graciously exhibit portions of his collection of these mandarin robes, because we also had a nice little organization at that time here in Los Angeles, which was called the Chinese Culture Society. And Mr. Hall was one of its patrons. It had both a Chinese and an American president, and very nice people. And we met every month in a Chinese restaurant. And let me tell you, those people knew good food. They didn't take us to any inadequate Chinese restaurants, to our great delight, of course. And then at least once a year, at the time of the Chinese New Year, Mr. Hall would come and give the lecture for the meeting, for the dinner meeting. And to many of those, he would bring the Mandarin breastplates and show us the symbolism on them as to why a particular Mandarin would have this breastplate. And we learned there, among other things, that all the military Mandarins would have an embroidery of a mammal animal on it. And all the civilian Mandarins would have the embroidered likeness of a bird. So these were all very interesting. Needless to say, and I repeat on purpose, the consul of national China was there, and before we sat down to the dinner, every time we drank to the health of the Generalissimo Chiang Kai-shek. No Mao Zedong for us. No, none of that, and which of course delighted me, and I had delightful conversations with the consul, a very nice man. In any event, you can even gather by that Mr. Manly Hall was a man of many interests, and I'll just try to siphon out of my geriatric memory. Manly Palmer Hall was born in Canada. His parents were both medical people. I don't know whether they were medical doctors or any others, because his grandmother was a physician also. But the story went, which he never told or even confirmed, was that he was born almost dead. What almost dead is, I don't quite know, but it's better than completely dead. So he was very puny, and they were convinced that he would die in short order, and that somehow in that cataleptic condition, they put the little body out in front of their door, waiting for it to be picked up, I don't know, by the Canadian mortician. And he came to, and he didn't die. So he was somehow revived at that particular time, and then subsequently, as quite a young boy, he was taken under the wings of his grandmother, who was really a sort of an archetypal figure in his life, and he wrote beautiful stories about her, even in the recently published Christmas book, as to how his grandmother was one to celebrate Christmas. And in his grandmother's condition, in his grandmother's association, he came from Canada first to New York, and there he was, by then he was getting close to probably 20 years old, and there he discovered the marvelous great museum and the libraries associated with it, and there he conceived the notion of writing an encyclopedic work about the esoteric tradition. He was already familiar with H.P. Blavatsky, he was already familiar with much of the literature, and there he began his research, and there he was from early morning till late in the evening, sitting at the tables, making notes, making reference notes as to where they might be found. And then his next stop was in Chicago, where his relatives, the Palmer family, owned, among other things, the Palmer Hotel, which I have been to a number of times. I hope it is still there. It's a heck of a good hotel. And there again he availed himself of the existing libraries and various sources, including the Theosophical Society. And then the last and final stop was for him to come out to California. California, he was seeking sort of a supportive environment, and he found that an environment in Oceanside, California, which is a very nice town. You should visit it if you haven't, and where was at that time, where there still is the headquarters of one of the several Rosicrucian organizations, the Rosicrucian Fellowship, but at that time with its founder, Max Heindel, formerly the vice president of Los Angeles Lodge Theosophical Society, and a very learned and very inspired man. And we had a lecture about him some not terribly long time ago. And Mr. Hall was quite fond of Max Heindel, and he profited by the support that Max Heindel lent him, and the various research material that Heindel made available to him, and apparently they had a very nice and lovely time together for not terribly long, for maybe about a year, and then Mr. Hall moved to Los Angeles. And he was lecturing already. I shouldn't go into all these details because they are likely to bore you, although they somewhat interest me, but he became associated with a sort of what now would be called a New Age ecclesiastical body that was called the Church of the People. And they held their meetings in the, which at that time, I think now it has been torn down, the Embassy Hotel in downtown Los Angeles. Nice big place. It was not the same as the Ambassador where Bobby Kennedy was killed. And so when we questioned him about that, he said that was such an amusing period of my life because the Church of the People was composed of curmudgeons. And I like curmudgeons, Mr. Hall said. And so he says, after we had a meeting or something, we would sit around late into the night and they would come up with all kinds of these interesting and outlandish stories, and it was just really more fun than a barrel full of monkeys. In any event, he also had, for the rest of his life, from that institution, a ministerial credential. And he did not... He never really called himself reverend or any of those things. But you know what he did? When some nice people whom he knew really asked him nicely, he would solemnize marriages. And I know one of the marriages that he solemnized, and of which I even saw some very nice photographs, was the marriage of Bela Lugosi, of Dracula fame, to his last wife. Now, I don't mean that Bela was a sultan and had all kinds of wives, but this was the last one chronologically, and he was already not very well when he died. Lugosi was a good friend of Mr. Hall through much of his life. And so Mr. Hall then found himself with grandmother coming to Hollywood. This would be, because long before my time, this is the Hollywood of the 1920s and then of the 1930s, so probably reaching clear back into the silent movie era, and after that, probably the very time when this little place was a neighborhood silent movie theater, because that's what this was, that's what it was built for. And if you can't see it from here now, it's been painted over, but if you look very carefully up there somewhere near that somewhat unaesthetic looking clock, there are two covered over little windows, and they are the projectionists' windows whereby they projected the movie to the screen that was over there. But that has nothing to do with Mr. Hall at this particular point. In any event, from him and from other people whom I have met here, I got a picture really of the 1920s, 1930s, 1940s Hollywood that is really endearing. You know, for one thing, all the movie people were here because all the studios were here. The studios haven't moved to various other locations like the San Fernando Valley or so. They were all here. And they were a zany and lively people. And among them certainly was Dracula, Lugosi, Bela, but also many others. And Mr. Hall knew them all primarily because already being a good writer, he was hired to write movies. Whether they were ever performed, he never mentioned. But that's the way it went in the studios. I mean, great writers like Aldous Huxley, Christopher Isherwood, Gerald Heard were writing particularly for Paramount Studios, and they got paid nicely, but their writing was never utilized for any script or anything. They put it in the archives. But in any event, you couldn't live in Hollywood without having some connection with the studios. I noticed when quite a bit later, in very early 50s, when I got here, that and I had some connections. Anyway, we all had some connection with the studios, and you could tell that everybody there, from the director of production to the electricians, knew some esoteric or occult lore. People were talking about reincarnation, people were talking about karma, they knew about Annie Besant, it was kind of a very receptive milieu for people like us who were interested in those things, including Mr. Hall. Now that was, of course, my time, but he did work for the studios, and his first wife, who tragically died at a fairly early age thereafter, was a movie actress. So the connection, let's say, was there. And by then he became increasingly famous as a lecturer, which of course was his great talent. And so I was told by people of that period that he was sort of the rising star on the lecturing circuit. While he was, I think, still in his late 20s probably, he was lecturing in Carnegie Hall, he was lecturing in big auditoriums in Chicago, Alvarez, always on esoteric subjects. And so he attained to great fame primarily on the basis of his oratory quite early in life. And he acquired friends who, at least some of them, were fairly prosperous and who helped him in his work financially, which some people are fortunate to acquire, and it's always a nice circumstance. One of these people had sponsored him on a world tour when he was still quite young. That was, a big deal in earlier times when people could, in the early part of their lives, they would go on a big tour that encompassed Asia and Europe and everything. It was sort of a way for people who were able to spend that money to educate themselves, And so he went on that world tour. He wrote incredible and often funny letters. I don't know who he sent them to, but so the letters that were really like essays about the various places where he was. And some of them are very informative, some of them are very funny, and some of them are acerbically critical for the places that he visited. He wasn't buttering up anybody. He told them of what he thought of the various places where he was. One of them being, which he often mentioned later on too, was of Palestine, this was of course long before there was any Israel. And they said that it was one of the most unholy places that he visited, that it was a badly organized country with a lot of poverty and a lot of dearth and a lot of misery, and that was really terribly disappointing. So he criticized sharply every place where he was. When you read those letters, they have been then collected in 1 or 2 volumes. You say, well, my gosh, this was a very critical-minded young man, somebody who really knew how to criticize. I must say that his sharp tongue, or maybe his sharp pen, were substantially mellowed with time. And he was not that critical later on. If somebody was mentioned, especially in the field of studies, that he wasn't too fond of, then he just said, oh, well, we don't talk of him. We don't speak of him. But he never said anything really bad. In any event, as all this went on, and he managed to purchase a nice piece of real estate on Los Feliz and Griffith Park Boulevard, and that is where they built the Philosophical Research Society. And initially it was like an L-shaped building. If you go into the courtyard, you can see the part where the bookstore is, and some of the rumpus rooms and so forth, and then where the library is, and ultimately the office is also Mr. Hall's office, and it's a 1-story building, and the vault and all of that, so that was built first. And the architect who designed it, Stacy Judd, I think he had one more name too, was a very famous architect at that time, who largely built in a sort of neo-Aztec or Maya style in the decorations of ancient Indians. It was around that time that Mr. Hall was also invited. If possible, please don't be bored. Because a lot of these details you really don't find anywhere else. And if you are interested in Mr. Hall, and then these things may be of interest to you. If you are not, well, then I'm profoundly sorry. But let's say he was also invited by some sponsors to go and participate in an archaeological expedition to Mexico and to Central and South America. And while there, in the course of those, he also acquired a codex. I don't know whether it is of an Aztec or of a Toltec provenance, that is in some museum, but that is known as the Codex Hall, named after him. And he had an abiding and lifelong interest in what now are called Native Americans, and that used to be called the Indians. And he wrote very eloquently and insightfully about ancient America and its heritage and how important that is for us. So these were some of his early experiences. Meanwhile, he lectured and also traveled a good deal lecturing, and began to set up his fabulous library, because this is before my time. He would go every year, I think, at least once to Europe and purchase books. And he was in contact with the rare booksellers all over the world, and then bring him back. Later on, that pattern, by the time I knew him, that pattern changed, and he would go every year at least once, certainly that was after the war, to Japan. He really liked Japan. And so he and Mrs. Hall would take off for about a 2 or 3 week vacation in the summertime and go to Japan. And there was his favorite antique dealer, Mr. Nakamura, of whom he even wrote a book. And he would quote Mr. Nakamura, and then he quoted him in the book. And Nakamura also, oh, you have come again, Haru-san. oh, I have something very, very unusual for you. And so he would sell Mr. Hall various Japanese antiquities. And he even wrote a little book called Very Unusual, and that is the book about Mr. Nakamura. It's really a lovely, endearing and funny book. So then, of course, this already happened when I knew him, 1950s and going to the 1960s and so forth. And so then Mr. Gilbert Olson, whom I mentioned before, Darling Man, and his wife would go and with Mr. Hall and Mrs. Hall. So the four of them would travel together. And so when Mr. Hall came home afterwards, and after he rested up, then we were always wondering, now when are the goodies going to arrive that he bought? You know, so pretty soon there came big wooden crates. Mamma mia! Took several people to move them. You know, arrived and they were put into the sort of the rumpus room there behind the bookstore, and they told Mr. Hall that the packages have arrived from Japan, and then you could see Mr. Hall coming out. You know, he was, as I said, he was a big, tall, and quite heavy-set man. I mentioned something about his physical condition in a minute, but anyway, he would come out, you know, coming out of his office, coming through the library, and moving toward the place where the crates were, and he was carrying a big chisel and a big hammer. And then he got to the crates and he started opening them up. And then he would step out into the bookstore and into the library and hold up various objects. Look, folks, isn't this beautiful? Look what I brought, you know. He was so delighted, and he liked beautiful things. Absolutely. In addition to his many other talents, that man had an aesthetic sense bar none. And that is, as he told me one time, somehow inadvertently, that one of the reasons that at that time, you know, we are talking now, 60s, 70s, that the reason that all his books were published by the Philosophical Research Society, he didn't give his manuscripts to another publisher. And I sort of asked him, well, you know, wouldn't you make out better if you published through Harper and Row or something like that? No, he says, because they publish books that are ugly. He said, I want them to be beautiful. So he procured the artwork. He designed the pages very often because he absolutely wanted his books, the ones that he wrote, to be aesthetically beautiful, that even before people read it, that they would be delighted because of their beauty. And doggone right, the books all turned out that way. But the chef-d'oeuvre, the most important, and the first great big is a lighter, the first great book that he was published, you can look at here, and that is the one that he researched really early in his life. And as I say, it is generally known as the Wisdom of All Ages, and if I can possibly recall the subtitle, an encyclopedical outline of the Masonic, Rosicrucian, Hermetic, maybe not in that order, symbolical philosophy. And quite a long subtitle, but rather informative. And he collected artwork for it, so that it contains, then he got hold of an artist, a California artist. In his latter years he lived here in Laguna Beach, J. Augustus Knapp, K-N-A-P-P. I never met him, but I certainly was familiar with his artwork. And this J. Augustus Knapp painted all the full-page plates in this great big book under Mr. Hall's instructions. So it's a lot, you know. And then in addition to that, there are hundreds and hundreds of black and white drawings and reproduction of black and white designs and emblems and things of that throughout. So it's an aesthetic delight. This is the one that I first saw with the old Hungarian farmer lady in the San Joaquin Valley. You know, it is a seventh marvel of the world. And it was so regarded, really, by the people at that time. So, and once again, when Mr. Hall published that, he had no money. Here and there, people gave him money for such purposes, but he didn't have any. But what happened was that he contacted organizations, clubs, libraries, and so, and said, "Look, I am going to publish a very unusual book," and he described it. And if you are so inclined, I will make a special edition for you. And so there was a Masonic edition, that was the very first one. There was an edition for the Theosophical Society, for all kinds of, we would just put there, this is a special set of books for them. And so then they subscribed to it, and thereby the publication was financed, you know. And sometimes he would tell little stories about the publication of that book. Or incidentally, you know, he said that in my hearing before witnesses, he says, that is really the most important book that I ever wrote. And he says, since then I have been writing books on paragraphs and chapters of that book. And it's, I think, essentially true. One of the little incidents that probably very few people have heard was that Mr. Hall insisted on his books to have an index. He said, a book without an index is a mere fragment. And those are his words. And it's really true. You want to look up something, by gum, you know, and then you want a way to be able to get to there. So he had the big book, as we used to call it, he had it indexed. And the person who indexed the book was a paraplegic gentleman in San Francisco, who, lying on his back in bed, with propping up the pages in various ways, indexed the entire book. Now, I wasn't presumptuous enough to ask Mr. Hall, well, why did you pick that one? Although he sort of mentioned later on, I needed him and he needed work. And so it worked out into a very fine index in it, with Roman numerals and everything. I mean, when you look at it, it's a fantastic book. But by the time I got here, it was out of print. Now, some of my friends had it, of course, especially theosophical libraries and others. And then 50 years after its publication, Mr. Hall published the 50th anniversary edition. And so that is the one that I have there. I had an original edition on loan to me for many years. But you know what it is, how it goes with things that are on loan. You have to return them, if you're honest. Not everybody is honest. I have some of my books missing just because of the dishonesty in those areas. But anyway, but I got the 50th anniversary edition then, which incidentally he signed to me twice, because the 50th anniversary edition was a signed edition to begin with, and then he signed it specially to me. So I have two Manly Halls in there, and I'm proud of it, you know. It's a great, great book. Now, I don't know again whether you are interested in these things, but whether you are or not, I'll tell it to you anyhow. One of the interesting issues about that book was all along that not only was it really beautifully artistically designed, but that in it were these magnificent full-page plates, illustrating pretty much every chapter. There is a big plate. Now, what's special about those? They were great, and all the symbolism in there, because they were all made by J. Augustus Knapp on Mr. Hall's directions. But then when the 50th anniversary edition was published, we had an exhibit at the Philosophical Research Society in the library of the original artwork of the artist. And then we juxtaposed to it the reproductions of the plates in the first edition and then in the second edition. And you know what? On every last one of them, the 50th anniversary edition plates were much, much closer to the original artwork than the one that was initially published. Well, the printing and all of those things had no doubt, improved a great deal. But that was really the great work that put him on the map, so to say, and that he really felt that was his, as we call it in French, his chef-d'oeuvre, his chief work. And then, of course, he wrote many books afterwards, but as he said, they were all related to the subject matter in its various divisions in the book. So let us say I certainly, I was enamored with his oratory and the subject matters and the way he treated them. Actually, the very first lecture that I heard of him on a Wednesday night was on the secret doctrine of H.P. Blavatsky. And then many years later, in the 1970s, Theosophical Society Besant Lodge bought this building because we didn't build this one. And when we were ready to start our first public event, the speaker whom we invited and cajoled and were delighted over, the first speaker was Manly Palmer Hall. And what do you suppose he spoke about? The secret doctrine of H.P. Blavatsky. I remember, we have a stage back there, a proscenium stage. It's not big enough to be a theater stage. And there's a little door from outside from the steps that leads in. So we had it open. We had the big chair there for Mr. Hall. And then he came in. He was so tall that almost everywhere he had to bow his head a little bit. And he came in and he smiled at the room full of people, and then he picked up, I think, one of those big chairs that our friends are sitting over there with a different, we had those upholstery. He picked up the big chair and he shook it like this, and he looked with some anxiety in his face at us and said, "Do you think it's going to hold me?" Anyway, and then again he gave a fabulous, it was like reading the mind of Madame Blavatsky, So in any event, as time went on, I went to the society as often as I could. I spent a lot of time in the library. I came to know the library, dear Pearl Thomas, God rest her soul, a wonderful lady. I came to know her quite well and all of that. And so again, I was not an official of the society, at least not at that time, but I was around there a good deal. And every time Mr. Hall was walking back to his office or out of his office or so on, he'd see me somewhere there in the bookstore or something. He'd always wave a little bit, and twinkle in his eye. You know, there was so much kindness and friendliness in the man that it's almost incredible. In any event, the time came around, times changed, got to be about 1970. And at that time they began to have occasionally sometimes some outside lecturer. Mr. Hall spoke when he was not traveling, spoke every Sunday morning. And for quite a while his lectures were delivered at the campus theater, a movie theater on Vermont Avenue, across the street from City College, because the society didn't have a big enough auditorium yet. And then in the late 50s, I think, maybe early 60s, but there's a plaque there, one can see it. Then the big auditorium was built, which was also initially designed by Stacy Judd, but he designed it in a very spectacular manner, and apparently the funds were not there to execute that, so it became a much more simple design. But you know, I mean, it was the hall that it seats about 300 people if you squeeze them a little bit. And so, you know, it's a big room, not much decoration along the walls, but right where the stage is, where the speakers stand, so there was an Aztec design that looked like a waterfall with rocks. A real romantic looking thing, but it would have cost too much money, so when they built it, they did not put that there. Stacy Judd, by the way, for those of you who are familiar with these things somewhat, also designed the main building where the main hall and the library are in Ojai, California, of the Crotona colony of the Theosophical Society. That is also one of Mr. Judd's creations. In any event, I was there when the large auditorium was built and all of that, and Mr. Hall was smiling. Well, now we don't have to go away from home to do our programs. You know, he was quite happy about it. And then eventually in the around late 1960s, they occasionally had a so-called outside speaker, and one of them who became not so outside but stayed, you know, gave lectures there about once a week for a year or two, was a youngish gentleman, a recent PhD from USC, Douglas Lowe. He was a very brilliant young man, really knew his Esoterica, and a good speaker. And they were very happy with him. So he would speak during the week, and then Mr. Hall would speak on Sunday. So all of a sudden I got a call, in fact that was at my place of work, from Dr. Henry Drake, who was the vice president and sort of the business manager for the Philosophical Research Society. And he said, we need to ask you a favor. Well, sure, Dr. Drake, what would you like? He said, Dr. Douglas Lowe unexpectedly passed away last night. He lived in Ojai. He used to come in here once a week. And we need a speaker. And we understand that you speak all around town, so why not come and speak for us? Well, I said, yeah, why not? So then I went to Henry Drake, and whom I had met before too, you know. And then Mr. Drake took me into Mr. Hall, and Mr. Hall had seen me already. We would exchange few words, and so he was very, very kind and very nice. And then in the little insert of interview that we had, Mr. Hall asked me, good doctor, what is your horoscope? What are your astrological data? You know, and I said, oh, that's very simple, Mr. Hall. And I had, in those days, I had a miniature horoscope, a big horoscope reduced that fitted in my wallet. So I took out my wallet and I handed Mr. Hall. Oh, he said, you have it here. He was somewhat surprised and kept looking. Oh, he said, oh yes. We are going to get along just fine. See, here's a double Pisces and I'm a double Sagittarius. So it's the fish and the centaur with the arrow. In any event, it's really true because we never had the slightest difficulty or slightest disagreement with each other. And from then on, I became the permanent speaker during the week. My evening was usually Wednesday. And initially, I gave my lectures where I heard Mr. Hall first in the small lecture room upstairs. But then came the 60s. Well, yeah, I only started speaking there in the 70s, so I don't know whether the 60s had anything to do with it, except that they overlapped into the 70s, and we got the crowds, and they didn't fit into the small lecture room at all anymore. And then my lectures, as well as Mr. Hall's lectures, were all held in the large auditorium, and we had, on a Wednesday evening, we had 250 people in there. Entire buses from some of the outlying colleges would come in to some of my lectures on Wednesdays, and so it was really quite encouraging, let's put it that way. I knew it wouldn't last, but it was nice while it lasted. So that's then how it went, and as I say, my relationship with Mr. Hall was formal, because one thing, I am not a celebrity hound, you know. People run up to celebrities and, I don't know, I shook hands with Einstein. So did that make you now a good physicist, you know, that you shook hands with Einstein? You know, wisdom and kindness don't pass from one person to the other just because you meet them, you know. So I never bothered Mr. Hall. But every once in a while there was something going on, and he would call me into his office, and then we talked. And sometimes just while he was coming out of his office and I was coming out of the library, we would meet each other there and stand and talk a little bit. And it was very, very pleasant. He was always very, very friendly and very, very kind. And he asked me sometimes a little bit about my background, and he knew I was a Hungarian. After all, Béla Lugosi was a Hungarian, Transylvanian Hungarian he was. I may be a vampire, but I'm not from Transylvania, okay? You know, so, well, I told him about why I left my country on account of the Soviets being there and all. He was shaking his head. He said, the best thing would be just somehow that menace could disappear. He said, that's it. And then he told me, he says, when he was young, in the wake of, maybe during the Great Depression, he says, we all thought that maybe we needed at least an altered or a different economic system, because all of a sudden, you know, depression, poverty. But then, when the Soviets rose in the Soviet Union, then I recognized that everything that has to do with that sort of thing, with the red banners and the hammer and sickle, that this is perdition. And it says, you have experienced it in your own life and your own family. I said, yes, Mr. Hall, and that's why I'm glad to be here. We have to hold our own, and we have to hold to the spiritual truth, because only the spiritual things will be able to vanquish materialism of one kind or the other, whether it is dialectical materialism or whether it is any kind. Only the spirit will stand up to these terrible things. I said, I certainly hope so, Mr. Hall. So he was a patriotic American. He always had the flags out on the 4th of July. He wrote very, very eloquently and beautifully about American history, and I certainly can't conclude without that. And there was a particular interesting connection that most people don't know about. After all, when Mr. Hall came here to Hollywood and he started Philosophical Research Society, our Theosophical Society, we had a big establishment, a big colony just a little bit down in Beechwood Canyon on the hillside, and that was the old Crotona. You can still go up there and see some of the buildings. It must have been a really lovely, interesting place. In any event, the main leader and the founder of the old Crotona was a gentleman named A.P. Warrington. Mr. Warrington was from the back east, but he came out here and he had this dream of having an esoteric community here in Hollywood. Well, initially it was located, they tried someplace else, but then anyway, and they were here for a considerable period of time, from just before 1900 until the 1920s, in the wake of the war and economic problems and all that. Anyway, Mr. Warrington I never met. He died before I came here, but I knew his widow, who was a darling lady. She was the librarian in the New Crotona in Ojai. They were very nice people. In any event, Mr. Warrington became quite friendly with Mr. Hall. And I think he may have been the one who initiated, if that is true, it is rumored, and which I mentioned, I think, before, that Mr. Hall should go and see Annie Besant and to inquire whether he might find a place for his work within the Theosophical Society, because he certainly was what we would call very theosophical. He was extremely reverential and fond of H.P. Blavatsky, and in one of these books, the other book that I have there, The Phoenix, there is a chapter on Madame Blavatsky, and I try to quote again from memory, said, "Take away the contribution of H.P. Blavatsky, and all of modern occultism falls like a house of cards." So you could see where his loyalties were. And he was, again, I mean, he was never without his critical mind. And he didn't like the people who kind of picked up the ideas from Blavatsky and then ran with it. I don't want to say anything bad about anybody, but there were such. And let's put it this way, in my opinion too, they didn't do much good. They take all somebody's ideas, and then they have their own inspirations, they have their own master, they have their own thing and so forth. And it's falsification. I won't mention the name again because I don't want to offend anybody who may be interested in this particular writer. One of the writers who became fairly big in the 1920s and 1930s and all of that. The books are all dark blue. My bookseller friends will remember probably what. In any event, we had some of those books in the PRS bookstore, and Mr. Hall came out and looked. He looked at the book salesperson. "Do we have to sell this stuff?" And then at some point when I asked him, he said, I prefer the lily that H.P. Blavatsky created to the gilding that other people put on it. I don't like the gilded lilies. And so these are also important things to remember, because he knew authenticity from superfluity that has then often developed. In any event, he was very interested in Blavatsky and basically in the theosophical philosophy. He said that this was the great revival of the esoteric tradition in the 19th and the 20th century. And so Mr. Warrington wanted him apparently to speak with Annie Besant. But what happened with Dr. Besant was, as I mentioned in a lecture recently, she was a thoroughly straightforward, honest woman. And she looked at Mr. Hall, allegedly, he never verified this, and said, "You will do much better on your own. You know, we will do our work and you will do yours, and you will do great and important things." It was again to her credit. I mean, she could have captured the star for the Theosophical Society, but she told him to go and be on his own. But now, this needs to be said, and I have it all in my notes and stuff, but very, very quickly. Mr. Warrington he was also an antiquarian. He loved old documents and old books and all of that, as most of us do. And he came across some material from journals and little books of American history that nobody else saw, at least not at that time, and that had to do really with the foundation of the American Republic. And he made these available to Mr. Hall, who then incorporated it in a couple of his smaller books, The Secret Destiny of America, and the other one which I can't think of at the moment. They have to do with some mysterious events that are said to have occurred at the signing of the Declaration of Independence, and another very, very early event of that sort, wherein a mysterious person appeared, who appeared to have been an acquaintance of Benjamin Franklin, but even that is not certain, and who at a certain key time when the founding fathers were concerned about what may happen to them if they declare the independence, because after all that was treason, high treason at that. And this unknown man came up and gave an extremely powerful, convincing talk that America has to be free and everybody should sign the Declaration. And then he sat down, and afterwards he couldn't be found. I mean, I don't mean he dematerialized into the ether, but he was nowhere around anymore. And I think Benjamin Franklin referred to him as the professor. And then he also appeared at some other time. And Manly Hall used this as the dramatization, that there were influences and forces, human and maybe more than human, involved in the founding of the American Republic. And that this gentleman, the professor, was a messenger of these forces. And Mr. Hall said that there are the secret influences of the wise, and they do take a hand where they can in order to facilitate developments that they desire. And so he was convinced, and this was one of the proofs, that the American Republic was supported, and its independence was supported, and its freedom was supported by secret esotericists, probably in Europe, probably in other places, but this was not a purely political development, that it was a spiritual development, that the foundations of this country are spiritual foundations, and that is up to us to try to live up to these in our own attitudes, and this was very much. And then he extended that, as I mentioned, he referred to the secret societies, not only of the 18th century or thereabouts, but earlier, even the societies and the esoterically inspired associations of the Indian tribes, the Iroquois Federation and various others, that these were all run by inspired people, and that they built a foundation for this country, and that this is really a very important development with a spiritual background, a spiritual foundation. So don't just look at the United States as a political unit, but something that really had very serious spiritual foundations. And of course, I would also be very remiss in conclusion now if I didn't mention that in that connection, in his connection with his references to American history, he was very reverential and very fond of Freemasonry. He had written already either one or maybe two books on Freemasonry before he was even initiated a Freemason. Well, some people know, he was one of the people who knew. In any event, he wrote wonderful books about Freemasonry, and he was very devoted to Masonic order. I could see that. I remember when he, already in old age, when he went to San Francisco and received the 33rd degree Scottish Rite, and they took his pictures, in the Scottish Rite regalia, and he had one of those photographs there, and I said, "Oh, Mr. Hall, you look so important, you look so archetypal." He said, "Well, I wouldn't dress up like that for anything else but this." So that was also, and boy, did they respect him at the Grand Lodge in San Francisco. Whenever I went there to visit the library, so, "Oh, Brother Hall, you'll work for him." The people there were very, very happy to hear about it. So these are important things to remember, because it's the better part of wisdom to value where we come from. If we don't value where we come from, then I assure you we are not going anywhere either. As individuals, as a nation, as a society, because we are floating around in the air, And so, for instance, I have the Phoenix book open there to the chapter on whom he called the Plato of Freemasonry, General Albert Pike, whom he had a very, very high regard for, and we well might, because Albert Pike was really Albert Pike and Eliphas Levi were really the foundations of much of 19th century and subsequent esotericism. Without them, the esoteric tradition would not be the same. And let me say that the unjustified and unjustifiable calumnies against General Pike and things of that sort, even invoking his monument, which was held in reverence for a long time, are deplorable, detestable to me, and I will never have anything to do with anybody who hurts the memory of the Plato of Freemasonry. And I would say that sort of silently through the aeons, I have the approbation of Manly Hall with his little, well now, dear doctor, don't get so exercised, you know, have a little smile there. And once again, let's say these are reminiscences, and we'll go into his theoretical contribution as much as possible on the next occasion. But let us say that a discussion of the representatives and the teachers of the esoteric tradition, including H.P. Blavatsky, Annie Besant, and people like that, would be terribly, terribly inadequate if in it were not included the gentle sage in the big chair on Los Feliz Boulevard, coming forth with one sentence after the other of perfect grammar and perfect beauty and of incredible meaning, and that all of us who have had some of that experience will never forget it, and that we will never forget the content of those communications. Because we had here one of the great sages of the ages, and those of us who had any contact with him will never forget it and will remain forever thankful. So thank you, Mr. Hoeller. Thank you 1,000 times in retrospect. And when I go from this earth, I will always remember that you were in my life and how important that was, and how I have profited by your wondrous person and what you have given us. So I hope that has given you a little feeling of reminiscences of someone who was there, and we'll go into the more theoretical aspects of, let's see, what, you know, we mentioned a few already, of what his legacy really, you might say, consisted of, because that is certainly very important, because I think that the deeper philosophical mind in the United States has not been the same since he was here. That he has infused the philosophical mind with elements that are extremely important and that should not be forgotten, and that will endure and continue to help us till the end of days. So I thank you so very much that you were here, and we'll continue with this God willing, Deo volente, as we say in Latin, next Friday. And thank you so very much for coming. And wherever he may be, long live Manly Palmer Hall.